It's become something of a truism that Washington is broken, or specifically that the US Congress is broken. And given the level of rancour and partisanship and the abuse of the filibuster, bringing virtual gridlock to Capitol Hill, little wonder that Congress has an approval rating below 15%. One of the people that is trying to work out exactly what is broken and maybe how to fix it is Scott Adler. He's a political scientist at the University of Colorado and author of books including Why Congressional Reforms Fail. Scott Adler, welcome to Planet America.
Thanks for having me.
This week we saw the spectacle of a Congressional committee, a House committee, voting a censure to hold in contempt the Attorney General of the United States of this fast and furious gun-running scheme where essentially American authorities allowed American guns to be sold into Mexico to try and trace drug cartels, ended up being involved in the killing of an American agent. Now, what does this say, the fact that a House committee is doing this to the Attorney General of the United States, about how Congress and committees are or are not working?
Well, it says a lot about divided government. It effectively shows how the Republicans have tried to go after the administration. There's been limited ways in which they've been able to do this in an investigatory manner. The committee that ISA runs, this Government Reform Committee, is meant to be an oversight committee of the administration, of basically federal bureaucracy, but it's also been used as an arm, a political arm, to embarrass the administration, Republicans going after Obama and his officials. In this instance, ISA came in the beginning of this congressional term saying that he was really going to investigate the Obama administration, look into things that had happened. This was the one that seemed to stick. This investigation into the Justice Department and the guns going back to Mexico.
So they issued subpoenas, and the Attorney General said, "I'm going to turn up, but I'm not going to turn up with all these documents that you've asked for." Who's right and who's wrong in this situation?
Well, it's not clear. I don't think there's one answer to this question. There is executive privilege. There is the ability of the executive to perform its functions, but on the other hand, because of this separation of powers, of course, we have a Congress whose responsibility it is to make the bureaucracy, make the administration answerable to the people. But it's not entirely clear in these situations exactly who is responsible for doing what. And these are both constitutional questions, but they're also very much political questions as well.
To be fair to the Republican Congress, this is probably not new. Oversight committees examining oversight. I mean, you compare them to the Clinton years, and they're a lot more tame now than they were then. But what is new, when we talk about a broken Congress, is the filibuster in particular with the Senate. They've just been going crazy that nothing happens at all in the Senate now. My question is, with the constant blocking that's happening now where nothing can get through, the complete gridlock through the Senate and Congress for that matter, where's this all going in 10 years' time, in 20 years' time?
Well, so I wouldn't be in complete agreement that it's total gridlock. So what we often see is that Congress has sort of two sets of responsibilities. One is perhaps an agenda of the majority party or the president's agenda, which is often more of a partisan agenda. So when Obama, of course, his priority in the first 2 years was the health care legislation. There were a few other things as well. But as well, it has all of this recurring legislation, all of this legislation that comes up frequently for renewal. It's an astounding amount of legislation. Everything from the Food and Drug Administration to the intelligence programs to highways, farms, the Securities and Exchange Commission, almost anything you can think of. What happens is these expire on a very frequent basis, 4 years, 6 years, and Congress has to go back and renew those. That's what it's been doing. So we wonder, with all this gridlock, what are all these members doing on the Hill from week to week. Well, that's what they've been doing. They've been working on.
But they even stalled on things like the Import-Export Bank earlier this year. Some of those rubber stamps, they're going, well, not so fast.
That's right. That's right. So what has happened is this partisanship has even started to bleed into this must-pass legislation. And I think the epitome of this, of course, was last summer's debt limit increase, which was normally a rubber stamp, right? Ticking a box and saying, okay, we're going to raise the debt limit. That turned into a partisan battle about overall government spending.
Given that the President is now issuing executive orders to stop the high level of deportation of the children of illegal migrants and so on, does Congress look at that and say, hey, where does that leave us? You know, we want to have a role here in shaping policy, or in an election year are they quite happy not to have to deal with this because they're not going to get DREAM Act questions back home?
The administration's strategy of, well, if I'm not going to get the legislation, I'll just simply move ahead in executive orders. You know, it does cut Congress out of this. And now they've got to decide, well, are we going to come back and legislate these matters? Probably not. But what it says is that Congress is now abdicating some of its legislative responsibility.
And it's not just immigration either, because there's also the contraception mandate earlier this year. There's recess appointments now. They're just bypassing the Senate completely. Are we seeing a move towards an elected king as the executive just takes more and more power?
Well, you're certainly moving toward you're abdicating more responsibilities over to the president when the two chambers are unable to come to agreement, or the Congress is unable to come to agreement with the president. It's probably even a little easier if both chambers are of the same party to enter into negotiations with the president on things that they should be able to come to agreement with. But there are going to be these matters that there's simply going to be no middle ground. The president does have a certain amount of authority to simply move ahead by issuing an executive order or something like an executive order. And these are going to be things probably that we weren't going to see legislation enacted anyway. And the president, of course, needs to position himself for re-election.
He does.
Yeah.
Ever since the 2010 midterms, the president has been encouraged to run against a do-nothing Congress, Harry Truman style. The other style, of course, in running against Congress or not being able to get along with Congress is the Jimmy Carter style. Where do you think he's headed this year? Can he afford, particularly if he's also potentially running against the Supreme Court post-healthcare, to be beating up on the Congress right now?
Yeah, there's no question that is his strategy, is to run against a do-nothing Congress. And to most observers, that's going to be a successful strategy, right? They're going to see that very little has gotten done, that even on this must-pass legislation, they're having trouble doing that. So he can successfully say, well, if you want someone who is going to simply take action, move the ball forward, you're going to need to re-elect me. And of course, he's going to make this case that you're going to need to re-elect Democrats in both chambers.
I was going to ask, if you were president and Congress and the Senate, all of them combined, what reforms would you make? What are the reforms that need to be made to make Congress run smoother?
Yeah, I think our campaign, the way we run our campaigns, has really gotten to be very, very problematic. The amount of money that we have in these campaigns, and of course the move toward funding campaigns external to the campaigns themselves, so external to the parties, all of the super PAC money, the money that's floating out there. And it seems to be pushing lawmakers further and further to the fringes of the parties. And that has, of course, real consequences when they get up to Capitol Hill, because some temper that tone when it turns out that they're actually in committee rooms or on the floor voting, but some don't. And we've seen over the last few years, particularly with the Tea Party Republicans, with their uncompromising positions and their willingness to push things like the debt limit right to the precipice. And who knows what would have happened had there been a real default last summer.
I think we'll find out in about 3 months' time.
Right, exactly. At the end of this year.
Scott Adler, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.